As someone who enjoys mostly hopping around from game to game, partly because that's just, how I am, and partially because that's something the YouTube algorithm incentivizes by nature, I don't normally return to do multiple videos on any given game. But after playing a few rounds of Kingshunt during the public beta weekend a few weeks back, I knew I was probably going to circle back to this game more than once in the coming months. So I reached out to the developers to see if they'd be willing to answer, a few questions about Kingshunt and its development history. The game's creative director and CEO took the time to respond personally, which I was very grateful for. The following interview takes place back and forth over email in the form of a Q&A format. To try to keep things pretty straightforward for those of you watching, I will be occasionally chiming in between questions to provide my own thoughts on their responses. So to prevent you from getting confused over who's talking, I will be putting the questions and respective answers on screen as I read them aloud, whereas when I'm voicing my own opinions, you won't see any correlating on-screen material. Question number 1. How long has Kingshunt been in development? There are tweets referencing development as far back as 2017. This has been a long journey to get here where we are now. We started somewhere around 2017 to 2018, and it was only 4 guys working on this massive game. This has been one big Dark Souls boss scale battle to get here. It takes time to find the correct path and features to work with. We had to make changes in 2019 for server tech and backend. Current game we are now playing is about 1.5 years old. We're excited to show Kingshunt for the gamers out there. A year and a half is a fairly short length as far as most development cycles go, even for an early access game. But, as ever, time isn't always an accurate measure of a game's actual quality. One need only look at games like Yandere Simulator, which has been in development for about 7 years now, and still arguably doesn't have all that much to show for it. Same goes for Star Citizen in a sense. It's what you do in that year and a half, or however long, that matters. Additional time does not always yield a superior product. Question number 2. What made your team decide to work on a third-person MOBA as opposed to embracing the more traditional top-down MOBA point of view? And what challenges, if any, have you had to overcome in relation to that change of perspective? Their answer? Kingshunt started as a third-person tower defense game, only PvE, but we decided to take a leap for PvP action. Third-person view is perfect for our hack-and-slash melee combat and magic abilities. Basic top-down point of view is good for traditional MOBAs, but we are not a traditional MOBA. We mix well-known game genres like hero shooters, MOBAs, and tower defense into one tight package. Many of our test players have played the game with MOBA glasses on, and afterwards they say this is not a MOBA at all. Personally, they'd be right, because the game is definitely not a MOBA. But I included this question to clarify that difference, because from the screenshots and early video footage, it's easy to confuse it for a MOBA. Question number 3. Over the course of the development process, what would you say would be the most difficult or time-consuming aspect? Most time-consuming is the online infrastructure and online services. Most players just don't have perspective on how complicated these online games can be to make. Just to make things feel right is difficult. We feel that character controls feel great now, but it can always be made better. It's challenging but also rewarding to see players take part in tests and test new features. It's super fun to see people use abilities and strategies we didn't consider at all. Question 4. In regards to the art direction, nice work in this regard especially, by the way, what influences did you draw from to create the game's current visual style and tone? Answer: thanks so much. Yeah, it's something I personally wanted to push forward. I'm personally interested in history. You find a lot of Gothic/European architecture influences, and also a little bit of Nordic mythology as we are a Finnish studio. Also, games like Dark Souls, God of War, and Warhammer are a big inspiration for us. Most of the hero shooter/battle arena games are stylized/cartoonish, and we didn't want to take that direction. As a history buff myself, and as someone who's played quite a few of the Warhammer games off and on, I've got to note that I definitely picked up on the Gothic aesthetic, and I think it really works for this game. Question 5. How did you go about as a team organizing who would work on what? Organizing the workflow to optimize productivity is a challenge for many workplaces, large and small alike. Their answer? We are a 10-strong team right now, and we plan to expand during 2021. Art and engineering are separate things, but in game development, these guys work together quite a lot. We are quite a flat organization without big organizational layers you see in big studios. Being small, things usually happen faster and leaner. As our background is from software development, we know how to push things out fast. Question 6. Gameplay loop from the perspective of a casual player like myself seems fairly easy to learn but difficult to master. How did your team work to find that balance to make the game welcoming enough to inexperienced players while also gearing it towards the more experienced MOBA veterans? Their response? Yes, exactly. Actually, this phrase has always been our motto. Easy to learn, but hard to master. Currently, the first-time experience is rough, and we're currently working on that now. Tutorial and PvE game modes will be coming soon. We want players to have a safe training ground before they take part in a PvP match. Jumping directly to PvP action is tough and frustrating. As in many similar games, MOBA veterans will find new ways of play, and we will support it with new content. Currently, we only have bare minimum in the game to have fun. We plan to introduce new heroes, minions, towers, and customizations for the player to play with. It's all about the variety and different strategies players can build. For the veterans, we will introduce ranked matches. We are building things incrementally and step by step. Okay, there's a few big things to break down here. Number one, I'm glad the development team is hard at work on a tutorial mode. I know there's this innately hostile attitude among some MOBA players that tutorials and practice modes have no place in a competitive MOBA game. But let's be real here, this isn't Dark Souls. The goal should be to try to get as many players in the door as possible, and unless you really want 20 to 30 minute long queue times every time you hop into a match, you've got to make the game at least somewhat approachable and friendly to newcomers. That doesn't mean you have to dumb down anything, but just give them the tools they need to get better at the game. Contrary to what some might think, just immediately throwing people into online PvP matches against far superior players won't solve anything, as while losing can be instructive if you learn from your losses, you're not going to pick up those much needed lessons if you're busy focusing on your insanely toxic team trying to mass report you and get you banned from the game and telling you to kill yourself just because you haven't figured out how to play the game yet. Some might say, well, just try to get good, then people won't complain. But how will they possibly get any better if all you do is try to get their account banned for sucking at a game? Having a separate space for practice ensures everyone has ample opportunity to get better and thereby levels out the playing field quite a bit. Same goes for PvE game mode. If you give people all the tools they need to succeed and they still play like trash, by all means criticize them then if you like, but at least give them that chance is all I'm saying. And it sounds like the developers are already preemptively addressing that concern. Number 7. During and following the recent open alpha test on Steam, you mentioned in a follow-up blog post that you acquired a great deal of both user feedback and analytical data. How has that new wealth of information informed the development process since then? Their answer? We went through all the feedback we've received, and thanks for that. There were many things we already were aware of and are now sure this is the correct path. We are adjusting our production from that feedback. First-time experience is the most critical thing right now. We need a tutorial and we need to polish the user interface. For clarification, I'm not sure if they mean user interface or something altogether different. Many of you asked for a new hero. Yes, a new hero is here, Prosecutor. As for matchmaking, we have a basic idea for matchmaking, but we don't want to have any rules for these tests. It needs a bigger player base to work properly. Disconnects and levers. This is something that will happen during the early tests, when the game's first-time experience is rough and players are not invested in enough because of the alpha. So extrapolating from that, I do think there's going to be eventually penalties for disconnecting and leaving, and also hopefully means for players to reconnect if they were accidentally disconnected from a match. But currently that's not one of the high priorities for the developers. It's one of those things, hopefully we'll see added in the weeks and months after the game's initial Steam release. Number 8, do you often notice a notable disparity between user feedback and what your own analytical data suggests, or have the two supported each other? Not actually, because these things tend to support each other. Sometimes player expectations are high for this kind of game, but we are still a small studio and super early into the testing process. We have tried to communicate this with the players. This is just the start of a long journey. I asked this question because I read and watched a bunch of developer interviews where talk about user feedback versus internalized data and the discrepancies between the two. And there do seem to be some discrepancies with the bigger games. Somewhat of a contrast between what a community feels is balanced or unbalanced compared to what the analytical evidence indicates. The perception of what is balanced or not balanced is not always in line with what the actual evidence supports. Since Kingshunt currently has a fairly small pool of players for its betas, compared with probably the number of players they'll hopefully have at launch, I was a bit surprised to hear that the data was mostly consistent across the board. Sometimes people aren't always the most generous or respectful in terms of how they deliver their feedback. Sometimes you tend to get a lot of more hostile feedback during the early process, but it sounds like they've had a pretty supportive community, and that's great. I wish more games had that early on. Sometimes harsh feedback is valuable, but at the same time, it's hard to not take some of that personally when it's coming in overwhelming amounts. So again, glad things are going good there. Number 9, what would you say has been your favorite map and or hero to work on? In response, they noted that they were super excited about the Prosecutor hero. and they attached a early concept art that I'll be displaying on screen now for you. Apparently this has not been shared before, so I guess I'm the first one to do it, so that's pretty cool. Question 10, and I noted that this was mostly a joke question. Any chance we could get a surrender option if our team is just getting endlessly, mercilessly massacred by the other? And they responded that it is in production right now and almost ready to go. So, I must say I'm kind of reminded of Wii Sports Baseball, where if you just start hammering the AI or the other player too hard, there's a mercy rule where the game will end prematurely. I don't think we're going to get it by default, one team is automatically surrendered, but having the player vote option is, nice. I moved on to some specific day one game release follow-up questions. Starting with number 1, can you confirm how many maps and characters will be playable on day 1? And they responded 2 maps and 6 heroes. Which does feel a bit small for, a character pool, but I'm hoping it grows over time. Number 2, will the game feature some sort of offline practice mode or player team versus bots mode, similar to what other MOBAs offer? And they did mention this in a previous question, but I'm just going to repeat what they said earlier in case you missed it. They said yes, at least offline practice mode. No confirmation yet on PvE game modes, but it is something that they're considering. Number 3, will there be support for both text and voice chat in-game, either at launch or potentially later down the road? The developers confirmed that text chat is in the game right now, and they are adding a ping system for voice comms. Voice chat will come at some point after launch. It is not planned to release with the launch version. Question 4. Are there any plans to institute a anti-cheat system and a player reporting system to combat cheating, toxicity, or other undesirable player behavior? Their response, yes, absolutely, this is a critical feature, and one we intend to work on. Number 5, and this is my final question. There has been confirmation over Discord that some forms of DLC will be added to the game later down the road. Can you clarify what content players can expect to see monetized? Would this include paid heroes, map packs, battle passes, or a cosmetic item shop? Their response was pretty transparent. Our focus for Kingshunt is to support it long-term with new content and balance changes. In-game stores will come too, where you can buy new heroes, cosmetic items, and account boosts. Yes, we will introduce new heroes and cosmetic items. You can always buy these with in-game currency or buy yearly season passes for quicker access. We will introduce new maps for everyone without cost. We don't want to separate players into different maps or game modes, which is definitely a plus in my book, because I think we've all had enough of map packs. Monetization is a tricky thing. On one hand, at this point, with so many games going towards the live service model, with a lot of post-launch content and updates, it's to be expected that there will be some kind of secondary means of monetizing the game. My line of thinking is, hey, you spend your money, whether it's $30, $40, or $60 on the game at launch, that's what you get. Anything beyond that is bonus material. If the game's lacking content at launch, that isn't excessive. But hey, in most cases you got what you paid for. And you're not necessarily entitled to like 3, 4, or 5 years of post-launch content, just because you paid for the game at launch. Developers do have to pay their bills too, so I'll embrace some kind of recurring microtransaction on the condition that we get stuff like free hero rotations, like we see in other MOBAs and first-person shooters, where players can test out paid heroes in public matches for a weekend or something before the heroes become unavailable again. Maybe during that time also offer a slight limited time discount on those heroes to further incentivize buying them. Point being, there's a compromised position to take. Where exactly that stance should be, I can only speculate. But hopefully that'll continue to be a point of discussion both internally and publicly in the months to come. I'm far from the only perspective in the community, and as this is something that would affect the whole community, I think some public back and forth dialogue on this would be advisable. I felt 15 questions was a good number to go for in the initial interview. I told the developer that it would have been cruel and unusual punishment were I to push it beyond 15 questions and force him to write a total number of responses equal in length to the average Harry Potter book chapter. 10 questions about the game's development and 5 regarding day 1 content and future content seemed to me a fair and reasonable balance to strike. That said, if this video does well, I'd be very open to coming back and asking the developer more questions, either just prior to or following the game's official release. So if that's something you guys want me to do, I'm willing to do it. I'd say if we can get, a few hundred views and maybe a dozen or so likes on this video, I'd be willing to circle back for another round of this. I don't normally do interviews on this channel, but it may be something I'd be more willing to do in the future as this channel continues to grow. After all, the bigger the channel grows, the less hard I have to work to convince developers it's worth putting up with me and my insanely long list of questions. I'm sorry, I'm an attention to detail type person when I want to be, and sometimes that works against me. If you enjoyed this video, please do consider leaving a like and drop a comment down below, letting me know what you think of Kingshunt and some of these questions. If you have other questions you want me to ask, let me know down in the comments section too. Personally, I'm rather intrigued about the game, and I look forward to providing more coverage of this game in the months to come. When it comes to MOBAs, I'm super casual, I admit it. I tend to suck, or at most do okay, but either way I have an absolutely great time nevertheless. And tower defense games are a hugely underrepresented genre on PC in my opinion. They've mostly converted over to the mobile market at this point, so I'm always in favor of a little tower defense gameplay in my PC game, if it fits the game. If you want to support the work I do in this channel, consider subscribing and clicking the bell to get notified when I upload new videos. I try to upload a minimum of 2 videos a week at this point, so you can look forward to getting more new content soon on a semi-regular basis. My goal is to cross over 2,000 subscribers by the end of the year. If I meet that goal, I plan to donate a total of $100 to the Team Trees nonprofit initiative, a group dedicated to reducing our carbon footprint by replanting trees in areas of human deforestation or areas affected by natural disasters. I strongly believe in giving back as I grow this channel. So if you want to help me get closer to that donation goal, clicking the red subscribe button would always help. Plus, doing so will make it easier for you to find my videos, so there's really no downside for you there. On that note, that's where I'm going to wrap it up for today. This is Warrior Dan signing out. Stay awesome, everybody. Stay safe, and peace out.